Breaking. Russian nuclear bomber destroyed. NATO. On high alert. Tonight, a nuclear-capable bomber, one of Russia's last strategic assets, is gone. Not damaged. Gone. And while Moscow stays silent, NATO is already moving. Alliance forces shifting into high alert, because what happened at that airbase may not be the end of the story. It may be the beginning of something far, far bigger. Stay with us, because what comes next could change everything. Welcome back to the Siege War. Now, before we get into tonight's developments, I want to ask you for something. Not a big favor, just a small one. You know how, back in the day when a neighbor did something kind for you, you'd remember them for it? You'd nod at them on the street? You'd wish them well? That's all I'm asking for here. If this channel has helped you understand what's really happening in the world, hit that subscribe button. It costs you nothing. It means everything to us. And now, tell us in the comments, where are you watching from tonight? Let us know. We read every single one. Now, let's get into it. A Russian nuclear-capable bomber has been destroyed. This is not a rumor. This is not speculation. It happened overnight at a Russian airbase, far from the front lines of the war. The base is known as Engels. It sits deep inside Russian territory in the Saratov region. For years, this base has been one of the most important military sites in the country. It is home to Russia's long-range strategic bombers, aircraft built to carry nuclear weapons across continents. One of those aircraft was a Tu-95, a massive propeller-driven bomber, a design that dates back to the Cold War, but one that still carries some of Russia's most powerful weapons today. That aircraft is now gone. According to reports, Special Forces operators carried out a precision strike on the aircraft while it sat on the ground. Satellite images later confirmed the damage. They show the bomber with a section of its wing completely destroyed. Analysts who reviewed the images say the aircraft will never fly again. This is not the first time this base has been hit. Just 1 month earlier, in July, the same location was targeted in a similar strike. This pattern raises a serious question. How is a base holding some of Russia's most valuable military assets being repeatedly reached by long-range strikes? The answer is not simple, but the impact is very clear. Russia's fleet of strategic bombers is aging. These aircraft were built decades ago. More importantly, Russia does not currently have the industrial capacity to build new ones. That means every bomber lost is a bomber that cannot be replaced. Not next year, not in 5 years, possibly not for a very long time. This is different from losing a tank or an armored vehicle. Those can be manufactured relatively quickly, even during wartime. A strategic bomber is a different category of weapon entirely. It represents years of engineering, specialized parts, and a level of industrial capability that Russia currently lacks. So when one is destroyed, it is not just a single loss. It is a dent in the country's long-term ability to project military power far beyond its own borders. This strike follows a much larger pattern that has unfolded over the past year. More than a year ago, a separate large-scale operation managed to damage or destroy roughly 1/3 of Russia's entire strategic bomber fleet in a single coordinated effort. That event shocked military analysts around the world. It showed that even aircraft parked deep inside Russian territory were not safe. Now, this latest strike adds to that total. Each time one of these bombers is lost, Russia's ability to threaten distant targets shrinks a little more. Military experts note that these bombers are not just symbolic, they are functional weapons platforms, capable of carrying long-range cruise missiles used in strikes across Ukraine. Losing them means fewer missiles can be launched from the air in future operations. It also sends a signal. If a base as heavily guarded as Engels can be reached and struck more than once, it suggests a serious gap in Russian air defense and internal security. For a country waging a large-scale war, that kind of vulnerability is difficult to hide, and even harder to fix quickly. Russian officials have not issued a detailed public statement confirming the full extent of the damage. That silence, in itself, is often telling. When something goes according to plan, governments tend to speak about it. When something goes badly, they often say very little. For now, the images speak louder than any official statement. A wing torn apart. A bomber that will not fly again. A base that has now been struck more than once in a matter of weeks. The question moving forward is simple, but serious. If this pattern continues, how many more of these aircraft can Russia afford to lose? And what happens to its long-term military strategy once that number reaches 0? That is the situation as it stands tonight. But the story does not end here. Because while the bomber was burning, something else was happening. Far from the battlefield, inside NATO territory itself. While the wreckage still smoldered at that Russian airbase, a very different operation was unfolding hundreds of miles away. This one did not happen on a battlefield. It happened inside a NATO country. In Poland, security forces carried out a raid connected to a suspected sabotage plot. Officers detained several individuals believed to have ties to Russian state activity. Reports indicate these individuals were of Chechen origin, a detail that matters because Chechen fighters have long been used by Moscow for deniable, off-the-books operations. During the raid, authorities recovered weapons and ammunition at the location. This was not a random arrest. This was a planned operation, targeting people who were allegedly prepared to use force. The exact intention behind their presence in Poland has not been fully confirmed, but the fact that they were armed and operating inside NATO territory is enough to raise serious alarm. This single arrest does not stand alone. Over recent months, a much larger pattern has emerged across Europe. Suspected Russian operatives have been detained in Germany, others have been captured in Romania. More have been caught inside Ukraine itself. Security services across the continent are now describing this as an active, ongoing hunt. Intelligence agencies are tracking networks of individuals believed to be linked directly or indirectly to Russian intelligence services. Their suspected goals vary: sabotage of infrastructure, surveillance of military sites, creating instability inside countries that support Ukraine. Some operations may be intended to test how NATO countries respond. Others may be preparation for something larger. What makes this trend significant is where it is happening. These are not incidents occurring in contested border regions or conflict zones. These are arrests happening deep inside stable, secure NATO member states, countries with functioning governments, established police forces, and long-standing security institutions. For operatives to be moving through these countries undetected, at least for a period of time, suggests a level of coordination that security officials are still working to fully understand. It also suggests something else: a deliberate strategy. By placing operatives across multiple countries simultaneously, a state can create pressure points in many places at once, forcing security services to stretch their resources thin. This is often described by analysts as a form of hybrid warfare. Actions that fall short of open military conflict, but still cause disruption, fear, and strain on a country's institutions. Poland's response to this latest arrest has been swift and public. Polish officials have used the moment to reinforce their long-standing warning that preparations for a potential larger conflict must continue and should not be delayed. Poland maintains one of the most capable militaries in Europe. It has consistently pushed for stronger deterrence measures within the alliance. This latest arrest only strengthens that argument inside Polish political circles. Meanwhile, in Northern Europe, a related shift is taking place. Sweden has begun moving military units into Finland, a country that shares a long land border with Russia. This deployment came after a direct request from Finnish authorities, who asked for additional support in monitoring and securing that border region. As part of this arrangement, Swedish fighter jets are also being positioned to help protect Finnish airspace. This is a significant development. It shows two countries, both relatively new NATO members, actively reinforcing one another in direct response to concerns about Russian activity nearby. Taken together, these events paint a picture of an alliance that is no longer treating these incidents as isolated. A bomber destroyed inside Russia, operatives captured inside NATO, military reinforcements moving into border regions. Each of these, on its own, might be seen as a separate story, but when placed side by side, they begin to look like pieces of a much larger, more coordinated moment of tension. And that tension is not limited to soldiers and spies. It is also being felt somewhere else entirely, inside Russia's own economy. Explosions were not only happening on military bases, they were also happening at one of Russia's most important economic assets. A major oil refinery came under attack, and the damage has been severe. This facility is not a small or minor operation. It is one of the 5 largest oil refineries in the entire country. On a normal day, it processes roughly 300,000 barrels of oil. That number matters, because oil remains one of the most important sources of revenue for the Russian state. When a facility of this size goes up in flames, the impact is not just local. It ripples through the entire national economy. Video and images from the scene show thick black smoke rising into the sky, with visible fire spreading across sections of the refinery. This was not a single isolated strike either. Reports indicate the facility was hit multiple times, suggesting a sustained and deliberate campaign rather than a one-time incident. This fits into a much wider pattern that has developed over recent months. Energy infrastructure across Russia has increasingly become a primary target. Refineries, storage depots, distribution points. The logic behind this strategy is straightforward. Modern warfare is expensive. Fuel, weapons, transportation, and troop supply all depend heavily on a functioning energy sector. By damaging refining capacity, the ability to produce fuel for military operations becomes harder to sustain. There is also a financial angle that reaches far beyond the battlefield. Oil exports remain one of the largest sources of income for the Russian government. Every barrel that cannot be refined or shipped represents lost revenue. Multiply that across weeks and months, and the financial strain becomes significant. This is not a strategy that produces immediate results. It does not end a war in a single night. Instead, it works slowly, applying pressure over time. similar to a long economic siege rather than a quick knockout blow. Analysts who study energy markets note that Russia has already faced difficulties replacing damaged refining equipment. International sanctions have limited access to certain specialized parts and technology needed for repairs. This means that, unlike a lost vehicle or weapon, which might be replaced relatively quickly, refinery damage can take much longer to fully fix. Some facilities that were struck earlier in the year are still not fully operational. If this refinery follows a similar pattern, the financial and logistical consequences could stretch on for an extended period. There is also a psychological element to these strikes that should not be overlooked. Energy infrastructure is often seen as a symbol of national strength and stability. When fires like this become visible, both inside Russia and internationally, they send a message that even protected high-value targets are not fully secure. For a government trying to project strength during wartime, that message can be difficult to control. State media coverage of these incidents tends to be limited or carefully managed. This is common when the news being reported does not favor the government's preferred narrative. However, satellite imagery and independent verification make it increasingly difficult to hide the true scale of this kind of damage. The world can now see, almost in real time, when a facility of this size is burning. Taken together with the earlier destruction of a strategic bomber and the arrests of operatives inside NATO countries, a broader picture begins to form. Military losses, economic damage, security breaches, three very different types of pressure, all converging within the same short window of time. For a country already managing a prolonged and costly war, this kind of combined pressure is not easy to absorb. Every fire at a refinery, every lost aircraft, every failed covert operation, each one adds weight to a growing set of challenges. And while the flames at this refinery may eventually be put out, the deeper question is whether the financial and strategic damage can be repaired just as easily. Because behind the scenes, far from the smoke and the wreckage, another set of conversations was taking place. Quiet ones, carried out not on battlefields, but inside closed rooms, between officials who rarely speak publicly about what was actually said. Not every important conversation happens in public. Some of the most serious moments in this conflict are taking place away from cameras, away from press conferences, inside private meetings that few people ever hear about. One such meeting has now come to light. According to multiple reports, a senior American intelligence official was sent to Russia to deliver a direct message. This was not a routine diplomatic visit. It was described as a personal mission, kept quiet even from many senior officials and advisors who would normally be informed of such travel. The purpose of the trip appears to have centered on several key points. First, encouraging Russia to reduce or end its ties with Iran, a country facing increasing economic pressure from the United States. Second, reaffirming America's commitment to defending every NATO member state without exception. Third, pushing for a renewed and more serious effort toward peace negotiations regarding Ukraine. Each of these points carries significant weight on its own. Together, they suggest a moment where direct, high-level communication was seen as necessary, rather than relying solely on public statements or official diplomatic channels. There's also a historical detail that adds important context to this story. According to a senior Polish official, Russian leadership had previously told an earlier American administration that there were no plans to invade Ukraine. That assurance did not hold. This history matters because it shapes how seriously current promises are being taken. If similar assurances are now being given about NATO territory, past experience suggests those words alone may not be enough. This is part of the reason Poland has been pushing hard for accelerated defense preparations, rather than relying on diplomatic statements to guarantee its safety. Public comments from American leadership have also added another layer to this story. In a recent public statement, the American president said he had held productive conversations with Russian leadership and expressed confidence that NATO territory would not be attacked. However, when directly asked about the details of the secret meeting in Moscow, the president declined to comment further. This kind of silence is often meaningful. When leaders avoid confirming or denying specific details about sensitive diplomatic activity, it usually signals that the matter is considered highly serious and not yet ready for public discussion. At the same time, the claim that Russia will not attack NATO territory is being viewed with some skepticism by analysts. They point out that Russian forces have already been linked to drone incursions, sabotage attempts, and other disruptive actions across multiple NATO countries. If these actions are already happening, some argue that a certain level of confrontation with NATO territory may already be underway, even without a full military invasion. This raises an important distinction. There's a difference between a large-scale open military invasion and a slower, more indirect form of pressure involving sabotage, cyber activity, and covert operations. Some analysts believe Russia may be testing the boundaries of what NATO will tolerate, without crossing the clearest red lines that would trigger a full alliance-wide military response. If true, this would explain why so many smaller incidents are occurring simultaneously across different countries, rather than one single, obvious act of aggression. Meanwhile, military reinforcements across the region continue. Additional forces are moving into position near sensitive borders. Air defense systems are being reviewed and upgraded in multiple countries. Communication and coordination between NATO members appear to be increasing, even if not all of it is visible to the public. When looking at everything covered so far, a clearer picture begins to form. A strategic bomber destroyed deep inside Russian territory. Suspected operatives captured inside NATO countries, armed and prepared for unknown purposes. A major refinery burning, damaging both military supply capability and national revenue. And now, a secret high-level diplomatic mission aimed at managing tension before it potentially escalates further. None of these events occurred in isolation. Each one reflects a different dimension of the same growing situation. Military, economic, security, and diplomatic pressure, all unfolding within days of each other. For now, officials on all sides continue to publicly express confidence that a larger conflict can still be avoided. But the pattern of events tells a more complicated story, one where quiet diplomatic efforts are running alongside active military and intelligence operations. Whether these private conversations succeed in preventing a wider confrontation may not be known for weeks or even months. What is clear tonight is this: the distance between careful diplomacy and open conflict may be smaller than many are willing to admit, and every side involved appears to know it.